Hi, good evening, and welcome to Grant Overview for Farmers, the basics of applying for grants. This is presented by KCard, Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development. My name is Marissa Christie. I work with KCard. I am the Agribusiness Grant Facilitation Coordinator. And we'll get into what that means here in just a minute, but I know that everyone is on here because you want to know the secret handshake to writing grants. I used to say that there was no magic rocket science to it, but after reviewing some, and it's not that anyone is good or bad at it, it's all about reading the questions and answering them and being prepared to write it. So that's what we're going to go over today, is how to get prepared, places to look for grants, and resources that can be available to you. Let's see. So that's it. It's May the 12th, 2014. And what is KCard? Well, I told you KCard is a Kentucky Center for Agriculture and Rural Development. Doing webinars is a bit of a new thing for us. I'm presenting along with Katie Miller. She is a Business Development Specialist Assistant. KCard's mission is to foster business success and growth by developing and delivering technical assistance and providing educational opportunities for agricultural and rural businesses seeking to enhance their economic opportunities in and around the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Okay, what that means is we help provide technical business assistance. I specifically help with identifying funding opportunities. You don't want to take production advice from me. That's not what we generally do. We usually provide technical assistance in the form of business plans, feasibility studies, marketing plans, assistance with financials, financial training, how to keep track of it, even doing financial projections and things for businesses. And we will go over a little bit of that because that plays into assisting you with grants. We'll go over a little bit of that later. So I actually work for the Agribusiness Grant Facilitation Program. What does that mean? Again, we have a big, long mission. The AGFP program is funded by the Kentucky Ag Development Board. I am specifically funded by them and led by the Kentucky Center for Agricultural and Rural Development. Its mission is to help agricultural producers and rural businesses in Kentucky learn about, apply for, and receive funding available through numerous programs. What does that mean? What does that mean that I do? Is I look for grants and other funding for Kentucky farmers and agribusinesses. I send out funding emails. If you aren't on that list, you can get on that list. Go to www.growkentuckyag.com and say, add me to the list. There's a little link there so you can be added, or send me a message on here and say, here's my email address, please add me. We've got another funding email that will be coming out in the next few hours because we had some funding open up over the weekend. And so that's how you can get added to that list. Also on that website is a listing of open funding opportunities and also past funding opportunities, which can be helpful. See, we do winter workshops across the state. We have in the past. I think we'll go ahead and do that this year. We're just delving into webinars and working this way. We're hoping that we can reach more people. And I do one-on-one meetings with producers. I will come and meet you and talk about your specific business plans and what sort of funding can go into that. I can also help you with requirements once funding is awarded. So lots of different aspects to what I do. I've been called, let's see, to put a more personal thing on it, I've been called the grants matchmaker, the grants navigator, that lady that knows how to get money. I don't know how accurate that is, but I've actually been called that too. So my job is literally to help you find funding. Karen, my funding right now is not to help people in Indiana. But you can obviously still view our webinars and subscribe to the email list. I don't know where you're from when you subscribe, but, you know, so we don't know of a sister institution like what we do in Indiana for the grants, but if you contact us, we might be able to direct you somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to start out a webinar about how to get grants with bad news. It takes time and planning to get grants. Most applications really do read kind of like a legal brief, and if you don't start ahead of time, it's going to be very difficult. And I'm going to emphasize it again, it takes time and planning. Most grants are not something that you're going to decide that you want to do a few days before it's due. If you get a grant, there are rules to follow. Somebody does not generally just cut you a check for $50,000. If you know of a grant like that, please let me know so that I can distribute it to the rest of the businesses in Kentucky. You have to report back to your funder. Most grants are on a reimbursement basis, which means you spend the money and then you get it. And then, so not only that, you've usually got to spend at least an equal amount of your money to get, so if you want $1 from the grantor, you usually have to spend $2 of your dollars first and then get $1 back. So that's a match. You know, if you put in $1, they put in $1. And grant income is usually taxable. There are instances where it is not. I am not the person to go to advice on that. That is a very good question for an accountant. I'm not good with tax advice. But have hope. By the way, these are some little soybeans actually coming up. I always thought it looked like it had an eye, so I stick this in every presentation. People do get grants, and people do get discouraged by the process. I recently had someone that I had been working with for approximately 4 months on a grant, 3 days before it was due, with 95% of the grant due, tell me that they're done. They can't do this anymore. And I'm saying you're just tired because it's for the deadline. So it's a long process depending on the grant. Some are worse than others. Some are more complicated. Some are less complicated. Has a lot to do with the source of funding and who you're getting it from and how much. So today we're going to talk about the basics of grant writing, finding and applying for a grant, which I realized I had called it grant resources, but it's about finding and applying for a grant, and then funding program overviews. Depending on how long I take on the rest of that, shows how far into those I'll go. And you can contact me with questions on individual programs. Okay. I'm going to go over some some funding words that I use a lot and that people in the grant world use a lot, and we assume that everyone else knows what they are. It's just like at your job, you probably have, CSM meaning customer service manager, or you've got shorthand for whatever you're using on the farm. It's the same thing. NOFA, I've also heard it pronounced NOSA, N-O-S-A. NOFA means Notice of Funds Available. RFP and RFA, to me, those three things, NOFA, RFP, and RFA, are actually about the same thing. They just mean that there's funding available and you can apply for it. Letter of intent, LOI. Those I love, and I will explain to you why I love the letters of intent. I would rather be able to write a 2-page letter to tell someone what I'd like to do and should I apply for your program than to spend 89 pages of application and it wasn't even something they were interested in funding. We'll talk about ways to avoid that here in just a little bit, but that's why I like the letters of intent, because when you submit a letter of intent, they can then come back to you and say, yes, we're interested, we want a full proposal. Or they can say, no, we're not. It's disappointing to get a no, we're not, but it's better than wasting your time, which is valuable, on something that you aren't going to get or have a slim chance of getting. So that's letter of intent. It's one of my favorite terms. Okay. DUNS and SAM, you'll hear those not as much today, but when you're reading federal grant application, DUNS is a number that verifies that you are really in existence. It's shorthand for Duns and Bradstreet numbering system. SAM is actually System for Award Management. It doesn't matter if it's a grant, a government contract, whatever, it's how they pay you from the government. So if you go for a federal grant or federal cost share, something like NRCS and EQIP, you still have to have a DUNS and SAM number. And lastly, if I say, are letters of intent common? Letters of intent, we see those more, and I mention this because I have some people who have nonprofits or farmers markets or some things like that, that you may be applying for a grant that requires a letter of intent. For example, if you were doing some sort of educational program with your farmers market and it was a private funder, private funders sometimes will require them, and you don't see them as often with federal funders, although it does happen. It can happen. And as it says there on the bottom, if I say something you don't understand, type your question in the chat box. Katie she's supposed to stop me and ask.
Question from Judith, are letters of intent common?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They're probably more common if you're a nonprofit applying for a grant than an individual farmer, or if you're a small business. It can happen, but it's not as common. Let's see.
And so what about users in other states? There's a gentleman in here, Dennis, who is from North Carolina.
I would say that the general understanding of what to do for writing a grant is going to be similar. I am not paid out of another state. I am paid specifically by Kentucky. So my position, I wouldn't be able to visit you and do one-on-one producer consultation, but there's nothing from me to keep you from attending the webinar and gaining what knowledge I am attempting to present. And I will tell you up front that I don't know how general or specific everyone's background is. So this is going to be a pretty general presentation. My predecessor had an 18-step program to applying for something called a value-added producer grant, which we'll talk about later. I have actually tried to sum up applying to grants in 10 steps. Now, I'll be honest with you, some of those steps have sub-steps. But the real key to this is that the entire thing begins before you find a grant you want to apply to. By the time you find a grant...
We have another question. If the proposal is submitted for an individual farm, would we have a DUNS number?
If you are applying for a federal grant, you would have a DUNS number. Anytime you apply for federal cost share or money, and what the DUNS is you can type in DUNS and Bradstreet numbering system on Google, or I think it's iupdate.com, something similar. I can't remember the web address off the top of my head, but you'll have to get a DUNS number. They are free to get if you get on a website that offers to do it for you or says $50 and we'll update your DUNS number. That's not DUNS. DUNS is free. Same with SAM. Both are free. You do not have to pay for them. So if you have an individual question on that, I may do a follow-up based on some of the questions that come through on this, on how to set up with DUNS and SAM. I think that a lot of people would enjoy that. So back to the 10 steps, if we're ready. Yeah, so Addis, I hope that answered your question. This actually begins before you find a grant you want to apply for. It does require you to sit down and put pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, fingertips to iPad, whichever one. Thank you, Deborah, for the web form there real quick. I appreciate it. And that Deborah just posted in the chat box the web address for DUNS. I wasn't expecting a question on DUNS tonight. Okay. The other thing is is that it saves time and increases your chances of having a good and successful application, in my opinion. Now, you have to understand, this is my opinion and the way, with my experience writing grants, that I go through this. The first step is to know your goals. I know this sounds redundant, that your first step is to know your goals. You need to know your long-term and your short-term goals. So I'm talking 1 year and 5 year plus. Maybe your long-term is 3-year goals. It depends on what stage your business is at, what stage your farm business is at. And you need to know what it's going to take to get there. For example, if you were making homemade soaps from goat's milk and selling it, you know you want to expand your business, but what is it really going to take to expand? And you have to look at it realistically. Generally, grants will not pay you for something you're already doing, so it needs to be a future goal. And I know it sounds simple, but having those goals is really important for step 2, which is have a simple business plan written down. That includes a description of the business, which can be a short history, and its goals, a marketing plan where you plan to sell what you're selling. This doesn't have to be complicated. I've seen business plans 2 pages long. A management plan, who's going to oversee everything, and then a financial management plan, which is money is going to come in and money is going to go out, and it's going to work. So you have to have those elements to a business plan. This doesn't mean that you have to do it by yourself. For those of you, for my Kentucky farmers, KCard actually can assist with business planning. So even if all you need is a little bit of strategy and you can write it yourself, we can assist with that. And we do meet one-on-one with producers. Sometimes it may take a little bit to get to you because we do this a lot, but we do meet with producers. Okay. As I said, KCard will do it. If you want to take a little look at what it can go into a business plan, if you go to kcard.info, and we're going to be revamping our website, but right up here where it says resources, if you were to click on that, there's going to be some business development and business planning resources, and that's a really good place to start. There are lots of things on the internet that will tell you how to write a business plan. You just want to make sure that you're taking advice from something that looks good. If you want to call us, if you have a business plan and you want us to review it, we can do that. We can, turnaround time's not always next day, but we can look at that. And right now, our business planning services are free. KCard is financed or supported by the Kentucky Ag Development Board and also the USDA Rural Development Program RCDG grant, which is Rural Cooperative Development Grant. So we are supported by that. Our mission on both is specifically to assist entities in Kentucky. If you contact us, we can try to direct you to an entity in your state. There are not entities like ours in every state. For those of you in Kentucky, thank your legislators and the Kentucky Ag Development Board for KCard's existence, because they have really, without that to match the USDA funding, we wouldn't exist. Okay, so back to the steps. Step 3 is have 2 descriptions of your business and goals written down. If you don't have a business plan, this is something to have, because there's going to come a time that you'll find something that you want to apply for, or even you're trying to describe your business to someone, that this is handy. Have an elevator speech. People in the funding world have heard this a lot, and people in the nonprofit world, because if you happen to be in an elevator with someone who has $1 million to spend, you want to be able to explain to them in 3 floors what you're doing, what you want to do, and why it's good that you do it. So this can just be a few paragraphs. This is going to serve as something to take when grants say, give us a summary of your project, give us an abstract to your project. This may not be specific enough for their funding, but it's a starting point, so you don't have to start cold every time, because the hardest thing about writing for me and probably a lot of you, is getting started, writing that first word. So if you already have this written, when there's no pressure, there's no grant due, there's nothing due, it's a lot easier to use. And you can also use it if there does happen to be a letter of intent. I mean, executive summaries, letters of intent, abstracts, that's all a really great place to pull parts of your elevator speech. Then there's a let's take a walk speech. Realize that you're going to write this down, but this can be highlights from your business plan. If you have your business plan already, it could be the beginnings of a business plan. It should be less than 2 or 3 pages, I would think, because you aren't going to have a really long walk. It's going to be a quick walk. You want to use this to draw from for longer narrative sections and grants. For example, if you are, there's usually, the work plan narrative. There's the budget narrative. There's lots of different places where this can come into play. And there's also times that this can come into play if you're doing other things other than grants, looking for loans. This in the business plan can really assist you, just having it already done. Step 4 is find a grant. We'll go into that more in a minute. It's its own, like I said, there are sub-steps. Once you've found a grant, most grants now you can find online. And step 5 is something that people don't do enough. I don't mind answering questions. It's what I'm here for. But you can go online and look at a lot of this stuff and get the answers that you wanted rather than having me filter out what I think you need. So you want to review the program's mission statement. There was a grant that closed recently called Fund a Farmer. Animal welfare approved, finance part of the grant. Their mission was to have animals have more access to open pasture systems. So when you're thinking of things that they want to fund, when you're writing about it, you want to emphasize that each animal has a larger area, there's more sunlight, improved quality of life for animals. And you want to look at what they've, beyond their mission statement, you also want to look at what they've funded before. You can't always use that because in the beginning, the value-added producer grant funded a lot of wineries. Now we don't see them funding as many. There could be a lot of reasons, but it might be they funded a whole lot in the beginning and they want to diversify what they're funding. And so the scoring on wineries may have gotten a little more difficult too because the competition overall has increased. Are there abstracts for past proposals? If it is a federal grant, there are. You may have to dig. You can email me and ask for them. That's always a possibility because I can find them. If I can't, I will email someone who can. And ask questions. I'm going to take a real quick second and talk about this. People are really scared of asking funders questions. The truth is, funders would not be putting out a NOFA, an RFP, or an RFA if they didn't want to give the money away. So they want to give the money to a project that fits their foundation's mission. The better you fit the mission, the better you fit the federal government's goals for this program, and the better you're able to express that in the words they use, the better chance you have for success. The entire reason to read their mission, beyond knowing who you're taking money from, is so that you know how they see themselves and the kind of work that they want to do. You can use some of their words. You don't want to use them so much that they get sick of them. In federal grants, you might not be able to do that, but for private foundations, you can. You want to show their own values and return those to them so that they feel comfortable that you're going to use their money in the way that they intended. So I'll get off my little soapbox now. I've had so many people tell me that people don't want to give away this money. They really do. They really, really do. Otherwise, they wouldn't put it out there for you to take. Now, sometimes if you look back at history and you see that the same person has gotten money over and over again, It may be that they really enjoy giving money to that person, and it may be hard to break in, especially with private foundations. And I always say feel free to ask questions, but if a private foundation says do not contact us, don't do it. It's hard, but don't. That means that they have someone they enjoy funding, and they're not looking to fund anyone else. That's my soapbox on people really do want to give away money. Okay. And the other thing is look for things. There's usually webinars. Some places even have blogs about how the money's been spent in the past. This is farmers we spent it on. They have fact sheets, frequently asked question sheets. So that's step 5 is go through the funder's website. Go through it. I know this sounds like no-brainers, but just methodically go through these steps. Make a real budget. There are 2 things that I have seen happen when people make budgets for grants. One of them is that they just pull numbers out of thin air. We need a new facility and we want a commercial kitchen in it. We think between buying that building and building the facility, it's going to cost us $350,000. Okay, why? Maybe putting the commercial kitchen will cost $75,000. It's going to be $150,000 for the building, and then we've got another $125,000 to do the other renovations. Did you have a contractor look at it? Nope. Blind guess. That's not okay. You can get an estimate from contractors if you're looking for something like that. If you are looking for something more specific, say if you are looking for an improvement to your high tunnel or greenhouse, or if you need a better kitchen, you've got to have an idea of how much it's going to cost, and you want to know what that is before you ever know what grant you're applying to. At the same time, don't get so caught up on the budget and changing the numbers and worrying about $3 here and is this realistic cost for labor when we expand. Make a best guess. If you have your past numbers, record keeping is a big part of this. If you have your past numbers and you say, well, we want to expand by 25%, you know that you probably need to expand your labor by at least 10. And you can call KCard and talk about these sorts of questions. We can help estimate hours, and you can probably estimate the hours better than we can actually. But if you know what your past labor cost was and you're going to expand, then you at least have a baseline to increase. The other thing is that one of the grant programs I work with that everyone is always interested in is the Value-Added Producer Grant, and the template alone is 63 pages. That does not include the government forms. People get really scared when they see that, but that's one of those grants that you need to bite into smaller and smaller chunks. I can't eat a whole elephant, and you can't either. Well, not at once. I will, at some point in my life, I guess, consume enough food to equate an elephant, but not in one sitting. Grants are the same way. Step 8 is put all the pieces together. I see people get stuck here. I mean, it's simple, but they do. Stop procrastinating. Stop worrying about how many pages is too many. Stop worrying about the type. Stop worrying about that little number in the budget. Stop worrying about, does this sound proper? Stick it together. Just put it in there. Get a draft. It's good. Because you know what's going to happen after you get a draft? You're going to get it reviewed. I review grants for Kentucky farmers and agribusinesses. Depending on how complicated the grant is, I might want a month, a couple of weeks, or a few days, depending on the program and how well I know your business too. And this is my other piece of advice. If you don't get it to me, I mean, I think we all have that friend or relative that really loves to find what is wrong with whatever you have done, that is also good at reading things. Get that picky, grammar, critical person who you know to read it and tear it to pieces. They'll get some sort of crazy pleasure out of it. Why do you think I review them? But it'll help you. It will help you wonder, they look at it, they say, well, I don't know if you really answered this question all the way, or I don't understand this aspect of your business and how this goes together. Hey, they may be picky, but it's the same question a grant reviewer is going to have. Grant review has gotten a lot more serious over the last 5 years, talking about how if we could just get this one thing, then everything would be flowers and roses, and we've been, we've just really been focused on this, and it would make our life so much happier. Is in beautiful words and lots of words not going to help. Grant reviewers now, people know about grants. The funding in general has gotten narrower, and so you're going to have to be more concise so they'll read the whole thing, because if they don't get part of the answer or the general answer in the first paragraph of what they're reading, they start skimming, which is not good for you. Even if they get the answer, they may start skimming, but if they've already got the answer, it's okay if they skim. So you want someone who's going to be really critical of that grant to read it. Okay, double check it. Things like a DUNS number, which we talked about earlier, a SAM number. Make sure all that's good and current. Make sure that you put your numbers on the forms. Make sure that you dotted your I's, crossed your T's, that you checked the right boxes, that you didn't forget the box that says, yes, I am a veteran, I get those extra 10 points. Make sure all that's done. Have someone else check it. Have someone who's not read it check it. I mean, those are the last things to do. Double check it, and I would even double check it again. Go over the guidelines just one more time, and then submit it. That's my basic 10 steps to grants. It is really basic. I'm going to give you guys a couple of quick tips and see if we've had any big questions. I think the thing that everyone dreads is probably writing. So don't spend all your time looking for grants. It's really easy to get caught up looking for that perfect grant. I know I said to know your goals and to pick a grant that will go with your goals, but usually you're going to have to tweak it just a little to make it work perfect together. Make a grant calendar. If you see that a certain grant comes out in May of every year, or maybe it comes out in September and that's the middle of your harvest season or your busy farmers market season or whatever have you, or it's December and you know that you usually takes something to be processed at that point. You want to get all this done as much ahead of time as possible. If you have a business plan already done and you have a elevator speech and a let's take a walk speech already done, and you could even send those to someone to review. You can pull from all those, so it makes it a lot easier. If you have a calendar that says when it's going to be due, you can get all that done months ahead of time. I mean it. And you'll know what you need to do for which grant. You can say, okay, well, we were going to apply to, the KSU grant program for Kentucky State University grant program for small-scale farmers, and we know that that's been open every 2 months, so that's going to be open one more time on June 1st. And then, so I need to get all that done right now, but we know that the other grant program usually opens about August, so if we go ahead and get this budget done for that while we're doing this one and we're not as busy on the farm, you've got to kind of plan it like you would have. You've got to plan it like you do your farms. I know you guys know what you're doing on your farms. Some people may and may not keep calendars. Some people keep it in their head. On this, I encourage you to write it down someplace you can find it. Or put it on the computer, put it on your Google Calendar, put it on your Microsoft Outlook. I don't care. Just keep track of it. And I'm going to emphasize it again. Know what your goals are and how what you're asking for works with those goals. It's got to be obvious to the funder that what you're asking for is going to help you achieve your goals, and giving you money achieves their goals. That's the big thing. I've had too many people, not as many because I tell them now, do not ask or tell me what is their money for and I'll just do that. That's not your goal. Kathy will have a recording available later. Okay. Just real quick. Do we have any questions Comments or concerns right now? Am I talking too fast?
There's a question from James. He said, is there a dollar amount limit for individuals receiving grants, yearly or a lifetime limit, and can you apply or receive multiple grants in a year?
James, it really depends on the program. Some programs you can receive, there are some Kentucky programs like the Kentucky Proud program, which has a $36,000 lifetime limit, but you can apply multiple times through the year, and that's for their marketing grant. We call it the POP grant. But there is a lifetime limit. Many programs, or some programs, like the Value Added Producer Grant program from the federal government, you can get, it has two parts, a planning grant and a working capital grant. You can get a planning grant once for a project and a working capital grant once for a project, but you can't have, you can do, a planning grant, then apply in a couple of years and get a working capital. That's actually the way they'd love to see you do it. But you can't have more than one unless you're growing a new, so if you were making, had milk and were making cheese and you wanted to switch and, grow grapes and make wine, if you started growing grapes and switched to make, doing that with your cheese, because wine and cheese would presumably go well together, processing wise, no, but, so it really depends on the program, and that's something where you'd have to look at which one it is and the history. Like I said, some of them you can look and see that they do give to multiple people, or the same people multiple times. The downside to that is that, do I have any sample proposals? I don't have any right this moment, but if that's something people are interested in, I can make that up. And it really, the sample proposals, Allison, would be, I'm sorry I missed your question, Deborah, but the sample proposals would be something that we can talk about probably for general grants. I could do a sample elevator speech and let's take a brisk walk, especially the sample elevator speech. The let's take a brisk walk requires a lot of creativity on my part to make up an entire business, but it can be done. Actually, I think I have that laying around. Deborah, we will be looking at a couple of places for seeing that sort of information, some grants that you can get to look at or research. So we'll be looking at that here later. Let's see. Kathy, produce greenhouse for both and nut trees for planting. Kathy, I think that I talked to you earlier today, and we can start looking at some specific things for you individually in a couple of days. Grants for startups are a little different a lot of times. I'm going to tell you all a general rule. It doesn't always work. If you can get a loan for it, you're less likely to be able to get a grant for it. So, if you can get a loan for a tractor, less likely to get a grant. If you can get a loan for a farm, less likely to be able to get a grant. If you can get a loan for a piece of processing equipment, if the bank can repossess it, less likely for a grant. Most grants, especially federal grants to individuals, this doesn't hold true for organizations, but especially federal grants to individuals have an equipment limit. The equipment usually cannot exceed the lifetime of the grant. So some of your more specific questions, if you all can email those, and let me finish going through what I've got where we can look to find grants and some of the programs, and then we will move on, because there's some things that there are things out there to help beginning farmers. They aren't necessarily called grants, and it depends on what you need too. So we can delve. If you have questions, you can always email me. We can start setting up times if you're in the state. But let me keep going here so I don't run out of time. Okay, finding and applying. You have to play find the funding. It sounds like a fun game. It's what I do all the time. You check your eligibility and make sure the grant fits with you, that it matches with your project and timing, and having a grant calendar can help that a lot. However, if you know, for example, the Value-Added Producer Grant, I know I keep talking about it, this year it was supposed to close on February the 24th. It ended up, and it was going to be announced on April the 15th. I honestly didn't think it would get announced on April 15th anyway. I'll let you guys stop staring at the screen for a moment. So, and I'll tell you our little story. So, we knew that would be extended at least 2 weeks. So we knew that was going to put the project timeline, everyone's project timelines were going to be off. Finally, it closed actually right around April 15th. The anticipated date that they're going to tell everybody who got a grant is June the 15th. I'm not entirely sure that will happen. So you've got to be flexible sometimes when you apply for these. You know, I've had people ask me, you know, do you know when it's going to be announced, because we need to start getting seeds in the ground? And my honest answer is, if getting this grant funding is what makes it know whether or not you can plant it, then hold off for a year, and we'll just move the grant timeline, because that's what you're going to have to do. So you've got to look at that. Is the grant timeline going to work for you? And that's sad but true. The other thing that people don't consider as much, but if you have your grant calendar, you will, is, do I have time to do this grant right now? So if you get it all prepared beforehand, you'll be in better shape and you'll be able to handle it when it does come out. We are actually preparing to start a series of webinars on the Value-Added Producer Grant. It hasn't been announced yet. There's only a 60-day window, sometimes a 30-day window on most of these federal programs. And if you aren't getting ready beforehand, coming up with a business plan, financials, letters of support, money for match, and you're going to put it all together and write it and have something that's fundable in 30 days is really hard. So that's why I want it all done before you ever find the grant. So we're going to talk a little bit about starting to find them, and we'll get back to the slides. I get tired of staring at a talking box, and so I thought you guys might like to stare at a talking Marissa. Let's see. So match it with your project and timing, and then get it written. I get so many people who get everything done, but they get it written. So finding grants, the AGFP, the Agribusiness Grant Facilitation Program, which I'm the coordinator of, you can sign up for the email list. I think Katie right now in the chat box is still taking emails from people who want to sign up. You can actually go to the website, growkentuckyag.com, where there is a list I need to update. I'll probably update it tomorrow, of current funding opportunities as well as past funding opportunities. We are working on getting that a little more searchable for everyone. You can also go to grants.gov. That is an official government website. If you wanted to receive a notice every time the Department of Agriculture puts a grant out, you can sign up for that there. And they will send you an email that is from do-not-reply@grants.gov. And I would highly advise that you do not sign up to just receive all the funding emails the federal government puts out, because it's a lot. You've got to think the Health and Human Sciences, Department of Defense, you know, everything, down to U.S. aid in other countries and NASA. So any sort of funding that they put out. So I would choose, if you're involved in agriculture, I would choose only to get the agriculture notifications. Google Alerts. If you want to sign up for Google Alerts, I would recommend Googling Google Alerts, and you can put your email address in, and you could put something, and you could say, I want you to send me an email every time something new on the internet happens that says Kentucky Farmer Funding, or NOFA Agriculture. You can play with different combinations of words, and those are really easy to turn on and off. So if you don't like one, you just go back to Google and say stop sending it, and it stops. The Foundation Center, that's a really good one, especially for nonprofits. It's You can go and sign up for their little listserv or newsletter, really is what it is. It's foundationcenter.org. And you also want to check things like the Kentucky Ag Development Fund programs. So you can go to agpolicy.ky.gov, and you can also go, if you type in Kentucky Governor's Office of Agricultural Policy or the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Those are actually two separate entities, but both have funding. So those are places to look. First thing is to make sure you're eligible. The number of federal grants available to individual entities is not everything. There are more available to nonprofits, land grants from the federal perspective, but groups of producers can sometimes apply. Farmers markets can apply. Value-added producer grant program is obviously for individuals. The Rural Energy for America program is for individuals and small rural businesses. But you want to make sure that if you find a grant you're interested in, you want to make sure you're eligible. Is it what you need? If it doesn't help you with your goal, if they're going to give you $50,000, but you have to match $50,000, and it wasn't even what you needed to begin with, then this isn't the grant for you. If it takes you off course of where you want your business to go, this is not the grant for you. Does the timing work? I think I've talked that. To use my grandfather's expression, I've beat that dead horse enough. So, a bad match is a bad match. Don't waste your time. So you found a grant. I know I've told you to use a calendar, and now I want you to develop a timeline. I want you to figure out when you're going to have the budget ready, because even if you have a business plan, you're going to have to tweak that budget a little. You're going to have to tweak your narratives that you've already written to match with the funder. You're going to have to get those forms together, and some of those forms are not simple. And everything's going to take a little longer than you think it will. So you want to set some internal deadlines for yourself. And you might need letters of support. You know, those things take time to get. And depending on the grant will depend on who you get letters of support from. And the last decision, I know I'm teaching a sort of a grant writing webinar, but you need to decide whether to write it yourself or contact someone else. There are grant writers out there. There are very good grant writers out there, and there are very not as good grant writers out there. The upside of writing it yourself is no one knows your business as well as you do. No one can talk as in depth about your business. No one knows your goals better. No one knows what it is that you want to accomplish over the next 5 years and the limitation. I have seen some really well put together grants by grant writers. I have also seen grants where they got the grant, but the grant writer didn't really explain to them what they were going to be getting into and what they were going to have to spend money on. And that's a bad situation. You know, that's not a good situation for the funder, because the funder wanted to give this money to you to do that. And you want to take this money because now you have, $30,000 coming in. But it's not written for what you really need it. So if you get a grant writer, the key here is to communicate your goals and to review carefully what they get for you. It can be a lot of work to prepare a grant. And sometimes the timing isn't right for you to write it yourself. But you want to make sure that you have a grant writer that can really help you and really put something stellar together, because it can be expensive. Okay.
Marissa, we have a question from Dennis. How important is the financial assets versus liabilities of the farmer/owner in obtaining a grant?
What they want to see is that the business is on a sustainable path. With most grants, that's what they want to see. So even if you have stuff in the loan industry or the financial industry not the debt ratio that they would like, you can still get a grant. What they want to see is that you have the ability to perform the work, that you have the ability to provide the matching funds, and that what will come out of this at the end of the grant is something that stands on its own. They generally do not want to see something that is going to have to apply to a grant every year. And I do see especially a lot of farmer nonprofits that say, well, we have a funding for this position now, we've got to look for funding for this position again next year. You're much better off finding a way, while you have funding, to generate income. So even with nonprofits, they want to see a path to sustainability. Dennis, does that sort of answer your question? I mean, I'm trying to think of a grant I know of that pulls your credit score or anything. I can't think of that. You have to be, for federal grants, obviously you cannot be delinquent on your taxes. You cannot be debarred from doing business with the federal government. So that means you haven't had a federal judgment against you that says we will never do business with you again. But they don't generally ask you how much loans you have. Some of that will be in your financial statements. But the sustainability of the business is more important. And they will take into account how much pressure is on the business from debt. And they will want to make sure that it's not so much that it can't succeed. But if it can succeed with it, you can still get a grant. Does that make any sense? I'm going to go on, Dennis. And if you have more questions on that, you can give me a shout. Okay, there we are. Good. Okay, you found the perfect grant. Yay! It's due in 2 weeks and you can't devote the time. Well, even if you've got all the tools I've given you, sometimes the grant is so complicated or you're going to have to generate so much stuff for it that you cannot devote the time. Put it on the calendar for next year. Put it on the calendar for 3 months ahead of where it was next year so you can start getting ready. And put on the calendar the due date, but say start getting ready for, the local food promotion program grant in January because it opened in May, so that you know that it's coming. Problem, it requires paperwork you just don't have. Unfortunately, I do have a lot of people calling me 3 or 4 days before a grant deadline and saying, I really want to do this grant. And I say, you need a business plan to be competitive, or have you gotten a DUNS number yet? Getting a DUNS number, getting a sam.gov registration, those things can take weeks. Sometimes they just take days, but sometimes they take longer because some little box was checked wrong, the IRS got something wrong in your records because that's how they cross-check you to make sure you're really who you say you are, because they're always right. So you want to be prepared. I mean, if you think you're going to go for a federal grant, there's nothing wrong with registering for DUNS. The biggest thing is that every once in a while, if you register for DUNS, do not make your address public unless you want to be contacted by people all the time. But when you register for DUNS, just make sure that you keep it up to date. It doesn't cost anything. sam.gov isn't too bad either, but they are going to want your banking information when you register with them.
Marissa, we have another question from Kathy. Do all grants require matching funds?
No. All grants do not require matching funds. Many of them do, but especially some of your smaller grants that require matching funds. There are there's some smaller grants from the state for horticulture, from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, that don't require a lot of matching funds. There are things like Fund a Farmer, which required no matching funds. The Kentucky State University Small Scale Farmer Grant is up to $5,000 and requires no matching funds. There are some grants for nonprofits that require very little or no matching funds. And there are a lot of grants will be a dollar for dollar match where it requires matching funds. And if it's a federal grant, they'll want to see that you have the match when you apply. So some sort of financial statement from your bank or a letter from your bank, and they want to see it again when they award it, just to make sure you can still carry out the grant. But like I said, Fund a Farmer's one that doesn't. There's the KSU grant doesn't. It just depends on the program. So not all do. Now, Many of them do, especially once you get above the $5,000 level. If you're going to apply for okay, so let me explain the DUNS SAM thing. So first you would go to DUNS, the DUNS web form address that was given earlier, and we can find that and give that again. I might just put some information on that on Big Marker after we get done. But you get a DUNS first, and after you get a DUNS number, you can then register for SAM.gov. You can't register for SAM.gov until you have a DUNS number. SAM.gov used to be something called the Central Contractor Registration, CCR. So if you had something in that can complicate getting the SAM. And just like with DUNS, if there's already another business with your name at your address because you've registered a long time ago, but you don't remember what your email address was, 10 years ago, and who knows what your secret favorite color was at that time, it's going to take a little while to retrieve that. So not all grants require that, but all federal grant and cost shares do. So state grants generally do not require that. Private foundation grants do not require that. But it's their system of making sure you really exist. That's the DUNS. And then the SAM gives them a way they can pay you. And they want to know before they ever consider you for a grant that they can give you the money. That's how much these people want to give you money. Thank you, Katie, for the DUNS thing. All right. Well, we're nearing an hour, so I'm just going to tell you real quick about some common programs. The Value Added Producer Grant. We're going to have a webinar on that on May the 29th. Same time. It's just on a Thursday. Two that opened up Friday were the Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Programs. It's actually 2 grants, and they're both through the USDA as well. And there's going to be a webinar tomorrow and the next day on those, not from me, but from the Wallace Foundation. NRCS is actually a cost share that it can help pay for things like fencing, native grass establishment, all of those things. Its next deadline is January of 2015, so you have plenty of time. They accept applications all the time. Kentucky Proud does a lot of funding inside Kentucky. You can type in Kentucky Proud and KDA and end up with some of their funding programs, or you can go to my website. All this is on there except for the local food because it just came out Friday. And the Governor's Office of Ag Policy is actually also a good place to go for Kentuckians. And I think that about wraps it up. I want to thank everybody for being part of it today and asking questions. Do you guys have, I really quickly want to emphasize again, we didn't know who the audience would be for this, so we tried to make it as general but as useful as possible. If you have some follow-up funding questions, you can email me at mchristie@growkentuckyag.com. If you're interested in starting some business planning in the state of Kentucky, you can email Katie or myself, either one. I just thought I would send some emails her way. I know you appreciate that, right, Katie? I know you do.
Yeah.
At kmmiller@kcard.info. And you can visit us at kcard.info. So we've got some more chat questions.
There was one previously that I had skipped over, Marissa, from Ray. He says, I have a group called the Future of Eastern Kentucky. We are looking for types of funding to start waste to energy, aquaponics, and hydroponics all in one location.
Okay, so he's looking for funding to buy the location or to start. I'll tell you what, Ray, shoot me an email and I can answer you some questions, answer some questions for you if that's okay, because that's pretty specific, and that's actually what I do all the time for Kentuckians. So yeah, just shoot me an email, mchristie@growkentuckyag.com, and we can start going over exactly what you need and possible sources of funding. All right, cool, Ray, thank you. Okay, is that it? Thank you all for all the thank yous. You're very welcome. I hope that it worked. I enjoyed getting to talk to everyone, and if you all want, we'd love to have some feedback, and I may post a short survey on what else you guys would like to see. I may just post it on Big Marker and see if I can message you all. Okay? Thank you guys, and I'm going to get off here now, so have a good evening. Okay, all truth, I did not get off here. I just stopped the recording. So I really appreciate all the thank yous, and I hope that everyone could hear me well. If you have any comments or concerns, feel free to email me with those. Any suggestions for future webinars, those would also be useful. We're really just starting this, and we'd like to see what more people need. So, or what format works for you. If there's something you think would work better, please do not hesitate to let me know. And with that, I'm going to bid you all a good night. Have a good evening.